Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judy's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you in understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp, and welcome back to the next episode of the Keto Naturopath podcast. Today, I would like to do a collective topic, and I've sort of been nibbling at the edges of this for a while. And if anybody who's been watching the last month or so of the YouTubes, you know that I've gotten deep into the omega-6, 3 ratio, linoleic acid, and so on. And so let me sort of back up a little bit, because I don't pretend in any way to be the originator of seed oils. That really has been out there for a couple decades, and like everything else, you go through these cycles of the next new speaker who sort of carries the mantle of that particular topic. I hope I've mentioned to you, I know I've done this on YouTube, that back in the 90s, the late 90s, when I graduated from med school, there was a woman, Artemis Sinopoulos, a Greek-born American doctor, who's really focused on this, and she had a whole nonprofit organization in DC on the evolutionary perspective of essential fatty acids and genetics. Very interesting. She still has a thick accent, by the way. And so she was kind of the one that sort of brought the big wave through. You can go back, if you go on to PubMed or to Google Scholar, you can see there are previous research articles that even come out in the 60s. So the topic of essential fatty acids, omega-3 and 6, and the ratio and so on, that's been around for a while. It's just that people talk about this topic like, well, you should eat this kind of food, you should eat that kind of food. And believe me, I've given more than my share of talks over 16 years of seeing patients and community service relative to these kind of talks at police stations and libraries and fairs and so on. Yeah, I was the trained pony for a while. But what I am trying to do with this information is not just make it be another sort of interesting thing to listen to or to watch or to know about, because I've been there, done that. I've been doing PowerPoints for the last, 20 years anyway, whenever PowerPoint came out, and on various medical topics. And let me tell you that most people come to my talks, which is nice that they would, as opposed to not coming at all. And they would listen, they would engage, you'd get some questions. But even if there's a couple hundred or 300 people listening to a talk, there's not that many that would actually apply it. And part of that was the fault of the speaker, me and others, that they would present this information of, they called out various studies and so on. And let me split this particular topic right there about studies. Studies are from researchers, not physicians seeing patients. It's a whole different reality. They may well have an MD and be a researcher MD, but not having the actual pressure of selection of helping a patient move forward from where they are. Medicine and conventional medicine, meaning MDs, which I am not, is all about medicines. What medicine are you going to give them? As opposed to naturopathic, in my view of it, it's obviously we give them things too. They're more botanical medicines. It's certainly we do a lot of labs, a lot more labs than MDs, probably a 10-to-1 ratio from what I've seen. And yes, I'm sure there's a few exceptions out there, but guess what? I haven't met them. And I don't mean to be smug on that. It's just we're thorough about that. And so we are more about taking some things away. What is the biggest thing? So let's say the obvious example is smoking cigarettes. And I did never really have that example. That was a previous generation's example, right? Smoking cigarette. Are you going to tell them about, maybe they should go on a ketogenic diet or have more phytonutrients in their diet because of their smoking? Or would you say, we need to look at the elephant in the room, and the elephant in your room, sir or ma'am, is smoking? I've had a smoker come in that would see me exclusively for acupuncture. When I worked in a group practice, she was the primary care patient of somebody else, but I was the acupuncturist on certain days a week to take care of people. And that's what you did for that day. So she would come in, and she was in her early 60s, generally pretty healthy, played tennis, and I don't know if she went to the gym or not, but she looked pretty healthy. She was so proud that she was smoking and had no sign of cancer. And within 2 days, within 2 years, she died of cancer. So, things work until they don't. And that's the thing about looking at statistics. It's not like you get a gradual, wink, nod that maybe, this is your body sort of telling you, please don't do this. You got that wink, nod way up when you started smoking and coughing and hacking and saying, this is not a fun thing to do, but people got over it and then became dependent on it. So often that her case is a typical case. Things fall apart all at once. The car doesn't start losing one tire, then another tire, and really can't go, and then or something else. It just goes pop. And so that's the thing about talking in a medical topic and presentation. You get this information. Everybody thinks that it's not them because they're not suffering any of these things at that point. Until later they are. So my point in talking about the whole omega-3, 6 ratio, linoleic acid, and so on, initially it came out of the frustration of, where the heck is all of this coming from? I'm kind of a lab guy because that's what doctors do. They come in, you get their labs, I see their diet, you update on what they've been doing before. Are they still doing this? Are they still doing that? Are they, from supplements to botanical medicines to Chinese herbal formulas, etc. So you have to have an accurate picture where this person's doing now to the degree that they're truthful and telling you what is current. Certainly their labs are truthful. That's why I like labs. It takes the person out of it, just gives me the data right there. So I'm bringing that's why it was such a relief to have lab data, because a conversation, if there was a little meter and you're listening to the patient, you go, well, maybe that was about 20% truthful. Oh, maybe that was like 95% truthful. Oh, that's about 5%. You're sort of guessing, by the exchange. And yes, you get to know some patients very well, and their whole conversation might be at 95% truthful, but you have a ping, if you will, from down to up to down to up, and data isn't pinged. Data is what it is, and you get to have a clean conversation about that. It's a good teaching material on one-on-one, and certainly it was a good teaching material collectively, but I actually never brought that into my talks. I talked pretty much like everybody else did, just on the topic. Here's a study, there's a study, and then you put your pieces together. Now, I want to collectively present this issue, but also I don't want to give you a problem. I'm not here to give you an anxiety. One more way in which your life isn't working out, or one more way in which the world is polluted, or one more anxiety, one more stress. I'm not there. I'm saying, here's a reality of a subject matter. And if we move over to labs, which are easy to do and certainly cheap, we can see your data. And this data can be immediately changed by you without any interference by anybody else. This is why one of the reasons why I love the omega-6/3 lab. It's a simple lab, it's cheap to do, and profound change, and it gives people something to work on. So they can't argue with me that it's expensive. It's not. They might have to go someplace to get a blood draw. Well, grow up. They did that for their doctor. Now start doing it for themselves. Then after that, it's become so much easier. Go on a free app. I mentioned Chronometer. I'm not necessarily in love with it. It's just the one I know the best, and you can get it for free, or if you want a fancy version of it, meaning no ads, it's $5 a month. But you can document all the omega-6 and 3 and all the foods that you eat by documenting this out. Now you have documented data on you, which is the labs. Now you have documented data on you, which is your diary, in essence, that has now been, you can break it down into a lot of different things. And I say, just keep it to omega-6 and 3 for this particular. You can go back and flip other switches and see how much B12 is in there or something else if you want to, but just go through and you get that. You put these two things together, you have a direction that just you can do by yourself. So you didn't have to come public about this. You didn't have to embarrass yourself to find out about how your data was. So when I get some of these kind of, I think, ridiculous comments on YouTube, like, oh, we all knew about that. We learned about that by Dr. What's-and-Sus, 3 years ago. It's like, well, actually, it's been out for, as I say, more than a couple decades. And it started with many doctors, many researchers doing hard work. So Dr. What's-a-Sus, who was the first on YouTube. It's like YouTube is the new consciousness of, I don't know about the world, but the US today. If it wasn't on YouTube, it didn't exist. Did nobody read a book? Did nobody ever do a study? It's amazing. So anyway, it's out there. So now it's something you can do. And that's a whole, I would say, paradigm shift in the sense that it's not just, oh, I got this information. That was nice. You did this little YouTube or this podcast. And yeah, I'm aware of that. No, I'm imploring you to take the baby step of getting this lab done. And then you now have information in your hand about you specifically. Absolutely. And stepping away from the bricks and mortar method of practice, it's really interesting of the other people that you meet on podcasts and YouTube and so on that don't have a doctor. They may or may not have health insurance, but I'm speaking to people who probably do have health insurance and still don't see a doctor. They have very little knowledge of their blood work. It's kind of like they take their car in every 10 years to see a doctor if it has a flat tire. Other than that, they know nothing about how their body works, nothing about their labs. So we're not talking about illiterate people. We're talking about literate people that have chosen not to know that. And in fact, they know a lot more about their car than they know about themselves. They take their car in probably a couple times a year for maintenance review. Maintenance, not even a specific problem. They went for maintenance. How's that? Why don't you bring your body in for a maintenance exam? And I would say maintenance labs are very important besides height and weight and BMI analysis and so on. Okay, then. So having even gotten to my message is basically, as I've worked on my own personal frustrations of why the heck do I find a consistent portion of the people who come to me have outrageously high omega-6, 3 ratio. It's almost like a thing of the past. Haven't they gotten the word? I know their education level. And I think the dynamic is this. The dynamic is, to an extent, it has to do with education, but it's not as big as one would think. And to an extent, affluent has it's kind of the same thing about education. Well, no, it's more that people don't want to stop having their, and I'll say, potato chips. They don't want to stop having some of their favorite processed foods that come in a package that were made with these seed oils. They don't want to know about that. They want to work around. And they want to do the other little things. They don't want to go and sort of like find out, oh my gosh, I've been eating and drinking gasoline for the last 30 years. No wonder I'm not feeling very well. No wonder that. So they prefer not to know that. And that's the same dynamic that you found with cigarette smokers. Why is it cigarette smokers who get cancer still want to smoke cigarettes? You can say, well, it's addictive. That's part of everything, isn't it? Coffee's addictive. I'll speak to that one. In that context, I can painfully withdraw and go without it and have to go through my withdrawal symptoms, and there are with coffee for sure. But it's more about the effort. People they stopped doing the effort they did in growing up. It was an effort to learn to read and write. It was an effort to be on the baseball team, football team, girls softball, swimming, whatever it was. It was an effort to learn these things. Everything was like pushed down your throat. You're going to learn to go to swim camp or soccer camp, and you had to, your parents dumped you off and you had to learn. Eventually you got good at these things. Eventually the struggle of reading and writing turned into the joy of reading books. And I say that coming from a person who's severely dyslexic, and I hated to read out loud in public. I'd rather take off my clothes and stand naked. And I say that in an embarrassing way because I could not pronounce words. I had, it was right up through medical school, by the way. So that's one reason I studied by myself for the most part. So that is the dynamic of people have stopped believing they have to make an effort, because after 40, for the most part, and you can say after 50, after 60, after 70, but I say it's after 40 anyway, you then have to look at yourself in the mirror, man or woman, and saying, how do I want these next 60 years to go? It is squarely on your shoulders. Yes, genes have something to do with it, but it is primarily your environmental exposure, and I'm putting all of diet as an environmental exposure. You expose yourself to meat when you eat it. You expose yourself to salads when you eat them, if you do. You expose yourself to, et cetera, et cetera. Diet is the largest exposure of both nutrients and pesticides and environmental toxins. So it is that thing. So we're trying to put a little education between you and your mouth, so to say. What comes into it? And this is where the data comes in. So the topic is actually that the omega-6-3 ratio that I've been sort of like, what the heck is going on? It wasn't as I learned it that, vegetarians have more omega-3 or have a better ratio, and carnivores, we didn't use that word, meat eaters, had a higher omega-6. That's a small portion. I think that's almost not even the real issue. If the issue is 10 points high, I would say if you are a carnivore, which I am primarily, I may be in 2, 3, I doubt if it's even 4/10 of that whole problem. In other words, I have 6/10 that I can take care of, but not doing processed foods, which I don't. Okay, so in exploring this, going deeper and further and so on and so forth, that there are actually 4 epidemics. The easy epidemic to associate with high omega-6, low omega-3 ratios, lab value ratio, was obesity. And it made perfect sense. The oils come from seeds. Seeds are things that happen in the fall, and all the animals that hibernate eat seeds in the fall specifically. They up their omega-6, so they are forced to build fat as opposed to burn those calories immediately. So they are fat predisposed because they are going to go to sleep for a number of months, 3 or 4 months probably, and they need to wear it so they can sleep and use it while they're sleeping. So it doesn't work for us. We don't have that. We know there was a time, and it's humans, by the way, but 200 years ago, they slept a lot longer in the winter. They didn't have the lighting at night and so on and so forth. So they slept. And there's even really interesting papers about that. They would sleep twice. They would sleep like 6 to 12, get up for a couple hours and go back and sleep. So sleep was a big deal. We were almost hibernators. So it sort of could have fit back then. And if you go even back further, that was probably more of a true way of living in our evolution going back that way. So it served a purpose a little bit with humans. We don't have that purpose anymore. And so consequently, out of season, we can have these seed oil, we get these seed oils with it, which carries the predisposition, forces us to generate fat as opposed to burning it partially. Out of season. So in the very least, it's out of season, it's year round, and that's the easy one. So the story is complete, you snap the pieces together, you go, oh, I see that. Well, then what you don't know is that the high omega-6, linoleic acid, generates high inflammatory things called prostaglandins. It goes right down to a thing called arachidonic acid. I won't get too confusing here, but you're going to see these words, and I brought them up in the last video. I dare to get a little more complicated, but it's pro-inflammatory. So not only is it fat predisposing, but it's pro-inflammatory. So what does pro-inflammatory mean? It means name your condition, more than likely you're going to get it. The first and the top of the list probably would be heart disease. Heart disease was the thing back in the 60s and late 50s that Ansel Keys said, hey, we can tackle this. We take out the saturated fats. We add in, he didn't call them seed oils, we add in the polyunsaturated fatty acids, i.e. soy, i.e. canola, i.e. corn oil, i.e. cottonseed oil. Cottonseed oil was actually from the 1800s. It's becoming a little less popular. It was used for other things. The consumption of soy from 1909 to 1999, for that 90-year period, the per capita consumption of soy bean oil. That's the oil that's squeezed out of soybeans, obviously. But now it's a worse process. And now it's not just soybeans, it's genetically modified soybeans that have been heavily pesticided. So if you don't think you get any of that other stuff in there, it's become from bad to worse. But anyway, it increased over 1,000%, over 1,000%. And so the ratio has been totally dwarfed. It is guessed that, with reasonable evidence, that 100 years ago or 150 years ago, the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3 was 1-to-1, maybe 2-to-1, as opposed to 20-to-1, as opposed to 16-to-1. And that's where it is today, between 20 and 16-to-1 for the average person. If you were to stop them in the street and say, hey, let's go get this test. I want to see what your labs are. That's what you'd find. So, oh my gosh. So where does that predispose? So the reason I say the heart disease is more controversial is because you get once those two studies that I've told you about that were redone by Christopher Ramsden, who was of NIH, and published it in the British Medical Journal, not an American one. Wonder why that's the case. And said, those conclusions were incorrectly drawn because the information was too partial to base a conclusion on. They hid the rest until it was rediscovered. Okay, and so it was rediscovered, different conclusion, but you still have, for instance, Harvard School of Public Health is still big on, oh, wait a minute, there's a good place for omega-6. Omega-6 is, you get plenty of omega-6 for any kind of meat you eat. You get plenty of omega-6. And when I say meat, I mean chicken, poultry, game, all that stuff. You get plenty of omega-6 through veggies. So there isn't any need to go, oh, you got to go get your omega-6. That's a ridiculous thing. So we do need a little, we don't need a lot. And that little to a lot makes it toxic. Just like you need a little vitamin A, you get a lot. So if you're deficient and you really are living in a poor country and you're not getting any vitamin A, which is what you get from liver, for instance, from animal and plants, mostly from animals, that you will have a very hypofunctioning immune system. So you get your vitamin A and suddenly wow, all these diseases kind of disappeared, or viruses and bacterial infections are not as big anymore. You've suddenly had a huge change. Well, if you keep taking more vitamin A, more vitamin A, more vitamin A, guess what? It suppresses your immune system to the point that you then get hellacious outcomes and becomes rather deadly. Deadly to the point people do die from taking too much vitamin A. And there was always a warning for Arctic explorers, there's many of them anymore, to eat polar bear liver. More than likely they will die because it's so high in vitamin A. So that's an example of you need a little, you don't need a lot makes it toxic. Toxicity is all about dose, by the way. I mean, you can have certain things that are toxic with a molecule. Others are, water is not toxic to a molecule, but eventually it's too much water becomes toxic, leads to death. Too much oxygen leads to death, but you need some of it. So let's not think that, more is better. That's going to get you in big trouble. So the whole heart disease is still argued against. There's a lot of papers saying, what the heck are they talking about? You saturated fats are absolutely the way to go. And you drop the seed oils and you'll have better outcomes. And this is, in my view, the more truthful interpretation of all these studies. And this is what the internet has brought us, is it's easy to manipulate and come up with, I think, fraudulent data that looks specious at best to instill doubt. So the motivation from some of these places, they're very plant-based diet oriented out of the Seventh-day Adventists, Loma Linda University and others. It's actually become worldwide, and there's a whole big story on that. But they are now about instilling doubt, not revealing truth, and that's unfortunate. That's the internet gives us 50 pounds of bogus stuff to read to instill doubt, and the work it takes to make a truthful, well-designed study that reveals some useful piece of biology takes a lot of work, and there's not that much of it. Okay, so we do have an epidemic of heart disease. Put that into Google, epidemic of heart disease, and you will see it. But that no longer is the fastest increasing rate of an epidemic. We have an epidemic of Alzheimer's. And by the way, I would suggest you go online and you look at map of Alzheimer's, map of heart disease, map of diabetes, map of obesity, if you will, map of autoimmune. So Alzheimer's is one of the epidemics. It's actually phrased epidemic of Alzheimer's. It's pretty straightforward. For instance, there's one fact. I'm looking at a presentation I did here that it says, listen to this. Is this the one I want to go? Deaths due to Alzheimer's disease rose 55% from 1999 to 2014 in 15 years. How about, you can hear me clicking in the background. There was, let me see. There is, well, I know this simply because I did this the other day, from 1920 to 1920. From 2020 back to the year 2000, 20 years, so a little longer than the period I just told you, that the Alzheimer's incident increased 143%. So in 20 years, it increased 143%. Heart disease, this is percent, it's not per capita, so it's worse. And heart disease increased 7.5% in that time. So it's still increasing, still getting worse, just not getting worse as fast as it was. Alzheimer's is quickly getting worse. So if you look at the map of where is Alzheimer's, I'm looking at one of Alzheimer's deaths. I'm looking at another, and that was from Wall Street Journal. Another one from Wall Street Journal, that was from CDC. Wall Street Journal shows incidences, and it breaks it down by ethnicity, of course, and you see it's basically the same map. And in the presentation of the Alzheimer's data, it talks about socioeconomic. It's mostly at the socioeconomic, lower socioeconomic levels, the poor, if you will, the less educated, less affluent. So why is that? Because those are the ones that have been marketed to you the most easily in terms of processed foods. On the TV, on the radio, whatever, they took it, they bought it, they like it. It's not just the Coca-Cola. That's a good example of it. It's all the packaged foods. So they don't have an oppositional bank of information that says, maybe that's not the best thing to do. That's where the education and the affluence comes in. They have other channels of exposure. So not just the same old main TV or ads. So there's that. So you have that map looks exactly like the one for diabetes over the last 20 years, exactly like the one for heart disease over the last 20 years. And I couldn't get a map of autoimmune, but if you put in PubMed, so you can go epidemic, autoimmune epidemic, heart disease epidemic, Alzheimer's epidemic, obesity epidemic. These are all epidemics. When you track them down, one of the things they have in common, at least to me, it might be the only thing they have in common, is a very lopsided omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So why I go, oh my gosh, I look at this map, and granted, I just told you it had to do with education and affluence, and therefore exposure to that other way of thinking. So that's the biggest obstacle, by the way. That's the most toxic obstacle, is the lack of that kind of exposure. But if I didn't have that, I could be like Johnny Appleseed and go through this dark valley from Michigan to Texas, down the Mississippi River, in essence, in the states on both sides, and of obesity, of heart disease, of Alzheimer's. And I could simply say, ma'am, sir, let's change your omega-6, omega-3 ratio and have them change your life. I mean, if you're so far along in Alzheimer's, you've already had brain damage, that part's not going to come back for the most part, per my knowledge. But if you're far before that, but you're still you're still partially affected, we can probably reverse that and make a very big difference. So it's an easy thing to do. It's an easy thing to get actually hard, fast data on, even if it's different labs, by the way. You know, you have LabCorp, Quest, and a few others, and they all have their different little tweaks, but they will give you the same sort of ratio collectively. They shouldn't be off by much. You know, they are their own competitors there. And that's a big deal. And so from that, there again, back to you need to be able to make a little effort into your life to go over and document, you know, what the heck is my diet really like? You know, now this is the good part of the internet. You can go onto a free app that has a database of pretty much anything you could possibly buy in the United States. And you put that in, takes a little learning, not much. You put that into your daily, and for 1 week, you just lock in what you're actually eating. That is a phenomenal piece of information you can use. You know, before it was, you know, I had patients come in longhand, what they eat, and if they were truthful or nice enough to do that, we would have some good information. If they weren't, you know, it's like comparing clouds. You know, it's just nothing solid to have a conversation with. It's very disappointing. So there you go. And after that, if you didn't do well, you move on and you can sort of see what are the biggest sources of my omega-3. And you'll see that from what you've documented on this particular app, Chronometer. I'm sure MyFitnessPal and your favorite thing is probably there too. I just don't know how to use those. And there you go. You've now learned the secret of the health. You know, we're talking like the elephant in the room. Here's my analogy as well of why people don't do this. And this is the biggest ugly elephant in the room. It's a little bit like you have a new puppy, and you love this new puppy, and you think it's doing so really well until you found out that it actually went upstairs into the guest room. You didn't check in all the time, and that's where it was pooping all the time. So you had this couple of weeks worth of poop on the floor, and you go, oh my gosh, this room is terrible. So your choices are to clean it up, which is not a pleasant activity, pleasant exercise to do. It takes work and endurance, and you wish you'd be doing other things. Or you can just get air freshener. You can invest in looking at air freshener. It's like taking the supplements or something. I'm going to take something new. I'm going to put the air freshener. So let's say there's an air freshener that actually neutralizes all that and makes it seem like a clean room. Well, you know it's not a clean room. You just learned to mask it with this stuff you bought. Well, good for you. And so now you still have the mess, and maybe you put a chair over it, or maybe you put something else so you can't really see it, but you know it's there. So I'm asking you not to do that. I'm asking you to go through and identify where you are. You might not have a problem. Chances are you do. And I say that from experience. And then you move on from there. And so the roots of this are not just obesity. That's such an easy thing. It's Alzheimer's, which is skyrocketing. I mean, it is skyrocketing. It's heart disease, which has been skyrocketing since World War II. It's autoimmune, and that's the other aspect. So what about autoimmune? Autoimmune is Crohn's. It's colitis. It's Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's Sjogren's disease. It's lupus. It's arthritis. So these are autoimmune diseases, autoimmune conditions. They can be pulled back. Maybe they can't be completely made normal, depending how long you've had them and so on and so forth. But let me tell you, cleaning up that room and removing the things, you'd be surprised what changes. And maybe it does all go back to normal. Wouldn't you be surprised? So here I am at 65, fitter than I was when I was in high school, certainly more knowledgeable, duh. And, you know, sometimes I surprise myself. I'm not one to get off on being narcissistic, but, you know, as you get older, as I say, you have the choice of how are you going to get older. Which, you know, It is all on your shoulders. It is all on your shoulders. I say that not to add one more anxiety, but a little piece that is will be disproportionately of benefit to you in a good way is this omega-6, omega-3 ratio. Take care of it. Look at it. There's other labs you can go, and I'm going to be talking about other labs that I think are equally important and little things to do to just open that gap. But it doesn't mean, however we get that, so that's about food, right? Your omega-6 is all about food, that ratio. And by the way, as I've been saying in the last couple of videos, is like you can't omega-3 your way around this. In other words, you can't be taking fish oil and saying, well, see, I'll do better. It will probably give you some benefit, but according to Artemis Xenopoulos and others now have said, actually the omega-6 nullifies, prevents the omega-3 from having benefit. So you really have to take care of it first. It's not an either or. It's not like the seesaw. You add a little more to this side and make it balance. That's too easy. You got to take care of it. But look at all these things that will get better with it. So I'm evidence. I'm on no medications. I take some supplements, and not even that regularly. My addictions are coffee. I have a cigar 3 times a year. I like wine nearly every night. My wife wants me to have it only twice a week. So we do a dance around that. So that's it. I'm pretty good. But if I look at me and I go, I'm better than I was when I was in my 20s doing triathlons. So that's not the secret. It's not me and it's not my genes. It's the fact that I had a wake-up call to say exactly what I've just said to you. How do you want to go forward? How do you want to go forward? And I have older siblings, one who's already died. He was very athletic. It was multiple myeloma that I believe was from environmental exposures. So the choices are there. I'm trying to encourage you gently by going forward and taking some ownership, taking some responsibility, which I believe you do have. It's the same pitch I would have given all my patients, by the way. I told them all the time, it's on your shoulders now. I'm your coach. I'm not your person you come back to and you whine about this, that, or the other thing. That's once you get a book business, you don't want whiners. That's it. Okay, so there you go. Till next time. I hope this was a friendly shot in the arm. How appropriate for COVID, right? And that you do take this step forward and do something positive for yourself, and you change this. You will so appreciate it. We'll get on to exercise we've talked about and so on and so forth. They're all parts of it. But this one thing has nothing to do with that. And again, if you take this and you are, let's say you're a carnivore, and I don't think your ratios are going to be that high. If they're that high, let's say you're a 10-to-1 and you're a carnivore, which means you meat, fish, poultry, and so on. Well, then I say now you have to narrow down how much did the chicken contribute, how much did the pork contribute. But I'm not even saying you would be a 10. I think it would probably be lower than that if that really all was your diet. I'll let you know when we take ours again, which should be in the next couple of months. And because that's pretty much what our diet is, except for a few dubious exceptions. All right, till next time, be healthy. It's within your reach. Bye-bye. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp again for a brief reminder of something I completely forget to do at the end of every episode. You've heard me talk long enough in many different episodes, but what I would love you to do, and many of you have already done this, I just want to reinforce this particular behavior, which is to send me your questions. Send me your questions and anything you have about keto. If there's something that I don't know, I will look it up. And if it's something that intrigues me, I will probably make an episode, a podcast about that particular topic. So what you need to do is to send me your questions at drgoldkamp@ketonaturopath.com. So that's DRGOLDKAMP at KETONATUROPATH.com. Dr. Goldkamp@ketonaturopath.com. Feel free to join our Facebook group, which is also ketonaturopath.com. That's been growing lately. You also have to answer a questionnaire should you choose to join. And I don't ask for your email. I ask that you follow our terms. I try to avoid advertising and the obvious interruptions of just a good Facebook group. So, hope to see you at one place or other. Please send me your questions and look forward to talking to you and getting to know you. Take care.